everyone. Welcome to Budget Insider 2025. This is a bit of an unusual budget. Just to introduce ourselves, my name is Corrie McLeod. I'm the publisher of innovationoz.com. I'm currently in Vail, Colorado, sunny Vail, Colorado, beaming in to moderate this session with the editorial team from innovationoz.com, who are in our Parliament House Bureau in Ngunnawal Land down in Canberra. So I am going to start by encouraging everyone to ask lots of questions. There's been a huge first wave of news about the budget, as there always is. This is the opportunity to sort of dig into some of the information in there that's more pertinent to our sector. And Joseph Brookes, James Riley and Justin Hendry have been poring over the budget papers and have plenty to tell us, so please get your questions ready. I'm going to start by saying, welcome, gentlemen. It's always an exciting time down at Parliament House. It's a bit of a funny one this year, but can I start by getting a little bit of a feeling from what was last night like? What was Parliament House like? Did it feel a little bit different, given it was a pre-election budget? What was the feeling?
Oh, look, yeah, thanks. I think budgets are generally they're a very exciting day. I mean, there are some days inside this building where the whole building does vibe. There's a bit of an odd one yesterday. It felt pretty quiet by comparison to other years, and it was pretty, it was clear even from some of the budget documentation, excuse me, that they weren't expecting to deliver this one. There's just for those that don't already know, when you get to Parliament House, the lockup is now inside your press gallery office, so that everyone gets to go to their own offices, but you kind of lock down after 1:30 p.m. Wi-Fi's turned off, they take your phone, all that kind of stuff. It was pretty quiet during the day. It's sort of like once the Treasurer started speaking and people were coming out and all of the industry groups were getting doorstopped all over the place, it sort of got that vibe again. But yeah, it was pretty quiet, and we'll get to this in a minute. It was quiet in the same way that we think tech policy was very quiet in this budget. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think I've done 7 lockups now, and this one was definitely the most quiet that I've seen. And across the board, the papers are thin, noticeably thin. I've got one from Home Affairs, like we're talking, I mean, you probably can't see it, but it's very, very, very small for a super agency like that. So yeah, weirdly quiet. The odd typo in papers, which I don't think I've come across that before. So very odd. And yeah, the pub, we went to the pub afterwards, and anecdotally, the bartender was saying they weren't even playing it on the TV, which is unusual. Usually, people go to the pubs and watch the speech at 7:30. So that wasn't even happening. So yeah, an odd one all around.
Joe, you had a different experience. You were out and about, I understand.
Yeah. Good morning, Corey. Yeah. So I hopped down to the press conference, which Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Finance Minister Katie Gallagher gives before the full budget speech, and that's sort of their opportunity to sell the budget to the media. And it was a slightly more subdued affair, I think, than previous years, would be fair to say. It was very much the same message of a sort of responsible budget that deals with cost of living relief, but still builds a sort of future opportunity for Australia in this sort of changing trade and geopolitics. I think the difference this year was they didn't have the big Future Made in Australia package or those big investments in renewables. So I think it was a little bit of a tougher sell, and I think you could feel that in the press conference as well.
Okay. James, I'm going to come to you. If you were going to summarise the budget from an innovation perspective, are there headlines?
Well, this is one of the things when we were going through the papers. The thing that leapt off the page really was all the things that weren't in it and weren't kind of a focus of it. So I don't think, I certainly haven't. I know Justin hasn't sat in a budget lockup where you haven't kind of opened the papers and then seen pretty much straight away what your story is going to be. So in the end, like, my story was literally about what wasn't in it. And that, to me, that was there's no. We don't have in this country. We don't currently have a national AI strategy, and therefore we don't have a national data center strategy, and therefore we don't kind of really understand how we're going to leverage. Potentially $27 billion is the number that they're saying that will be invested in the next 5 years. It just seems incredible to me that there's that amount of money. It's not quite on the table, but it's looking like it will be. But we don't have specific plans about both making sure that it arrives, right? Having policy settings in place that make sure that these companies that control that cash don't decide to take it elsewhere. It is remarkable to me. Jim Chalmers is he's a PhD, has a PhD in economic policy, effectively, from looking at the Keating years. He's written a book on the digital economy. He's given speeches recently where he's lauded, the contribution that AI will make to productivity as we move forward. So it was remarkable to me that he could deliver a budget without referencing it at all. So that was amazing.
You all speak quite widely to a range of people. Given, like as you said, the messages around, slow and steady, cost of living, election coming up, safe pair of hands, apart from that kind of dominant narrative, is there other reasons from the people that you've spoken to why, AI, data centers, all of that kind of critical and emerging tech is just so absent in a time where the rest of the world is hurtling forwards?
To be honest, I think that this government got started late, and they've been sort of behind the 8 ball for a good year or so. The initial attention had been looking at quantum. There was a huge amount of effort doing a quantum strategy. There was the big investment in Quantum that took a long time to bed down. So while they started some work on AI regulatory issues, and we have been through this process of consultation on AI regulation. We don't actually have the regulations nailed down yet, but all of that energy from that, certainly, from the portfolio, it's really whole of government though, but certainly from the portfolio was focused elsewhere. Then when this AI kind of, when the AI wave hit, it has hit so hard and fast. And if you think about what's happening in overseas, like the US is hurtling along with everything they're doing in data centers, energy to supply data centers, and AI itself. Donald Trump gets inaugurated. His first day in office is he issues executive orders around AI. That's where the priority lies for the president of the United States, is in AI. Now, we just produced a budget 2 months later. We don't even mention it. It's quite stark. And so that's why we thought that was the story.
Joe and Justin, any comments on that topic of what wasn't in the budget before we move on to what was in the budget?
I might just jump in on the AI piece that James was talking about, because last week we were able to report that the government did consider an AI plan before last budget, and it's not something that's new in any way. You've had the peak bodies calling for investment in the space for some time, from before the time of ChatGPT. So it's not a new thing. So to see the government not provide funding for 3 consecutive budgets, any substantial industry funding for 3 consecutive budgets is very strange at a time when other countries, Canada, Singapore, South Korea, have all provided billions and billions of dollars in funding. We've provided pretty measly funding in comparison. So it is interesting to see the papers yesterday, and then just come back to about a year ago when there was a plan on the table, went to cabinet, didn't get up, and now it's sort of been lost to time. We've got another a capability plan that's now underway, but it sounds like it's in very the early stages. We've got the election coming up, so there's no expectation there before the end of the year. So,
well, hopefully there'll be some more reporting on this, James. I know that you'll be keen to ask some questions, about, well, where was it missing in action? Joe, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Corey. I think the big hole from the R&D perspective is that there just wasn't any real substantial movement on research infrastructure or the sort of the bold policy changes that a lot of people in the sector had been calling for to start to lift that level of both government and business investment in R&D. So there's obviously a national review of the R&D system underway. So I think there's a bit of a hesitation there to move before that is complete. But from the people I spoke to in the sector, their view is that we can't afford to wait because that gap has gotten so big. We're sort of almost at half the level of the OECD average on R&D investment, that it's going to take, it's a decade plus to sort of catch up, and every year we wait, that gap gets worse. So how you do that, there's differing views on that, but I think a lot of the people in the sector we're looking for either sort of research infrastructure or at least some sort of commitment to lifting those levels. And there is some research funding in there that we can get into, but yeah, it's nowhere near the scale, the sort of multi-billion-dollar scale that a lot of people say is needed.
I did have research and science funding as, something we could expand on. Sounds like there was missing. Were there other things in there in that kind of area that are worth talking to?
Yeah, I think one of the big winners, or perhaps a surprise winner, was the CSIRO. So they've their sort of budget win was a $55 million funding boost, and the bulk of that is for their own research capability. So $45 million to lift their wider sort of research capability, and then $10 million specifically on gene therapy, and that's a sort of biosecurity project, invasive species sort of work. So that was really good. It's been a sort of tough couple of years for the National Science Agency. They've had some pandemic era funding roll off, and that's meant some very difficult decisions, both in terms of staffing levels, and they've even cut back in some of their research areas. So I think there'll be a big sigh of relief from a lot of not just the CSIRO, but a lot of the partners that work with them, because that's their job, to work with industry and pull some of this research into the real world. So I think that'll be a very welcome step. There's also a little bit of a funding top up for the Square Kilometre Array. That's the big telescope project out in Western Australia. Australia is sort of partnering. There's another version in South Africa, and together that's sort of a really sort of huge project that probably doesn't get the attention it deserves. But there was some funding shortfalls in that, and the government's plugged that with about $48 million. And then there's a kind of smattering of other areas. But probably the biggest research winner was $150 million for cancer research and clinical trials. So that's really good, really worthy work, and I think that's a really welcome sign. But again, in case you didn't sort of pick up, these are all sort of little individual level research projects and sort of putting out fires and stuff that Australia has to do, but it's not at that level that a lot of people wanted, I don't think.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. That was really helpful running through that. I'm going to come to you, James and Justin. But before I do, I just want to say, if there's questions, please pop them in the chat. I'm keeping an eye. It's pretty quiet in there. So any questions, really appreciated. Justin and James, anything building on what Joe was just talking about, or did you carve it up? And Joe, that was your area of focus last night?
Yeah,
Sorry,
Joe.
Justin, you go.
Yes. Yeah, no. Joe very much did focus on the science funding. There have been some cuts at CSIRO, so it's good to see sort of some additional funding there. It's not stopping the 450 odd jobs that are going to be lost in the enterprise division. So that's still going ahead, but it is nice to see a sort of top up there as well. As for me, I had to sort of pick an area, and I sort of gravitate to government tech. So my story sort of looks at the business registers, legacy tech, that kind of thing. For people who aren't familiar with the business registers program, it's been going on for some time under the former government previously. basically, once the new government came in, it got to a head and they did a review and decided that to basically stop the approach they were taking because had blown out. I think it was going to cost something like $2 billion to finish that program. At that point, there'd only been $500 million put aside for it. So yeah, in yesterday's budget, there's another $200 million for basically the second attempt at reforming those registers. That work's been led by ASIC. So they've taken the program back from the ATO, which had carriage of the previous program. So yeah, $200 million to really get to work stabilizing that, because if anyone's used the registers, you know they're pretty antiquated. It looks like something, I don't know, from the early 2000s, not a modern day system in any way. So it's good to see them get that funding for 2 years as well. So a sizable program of work that looks to be coming up for them. So that was one of the main government tech projects. The other one was, of course, My Health Record. They also had just under $230 million over a single year to continue that work. It's, My Health Record tends to go sort of have single years of funding or every 2 years of funding per budget. So it's not unusual to see that kind of money in the papers. But I guess what is interesting this year is the agency responsible, the Digital Health Agency, is re-tendering for that work for the first time since 2011. So that's a contract that's been held by Accenture for some time. I think they've had something like $800 million paid to them over that period, and this is the first time it will be re-tendered. And there are plans to sort of break it up and make it more modular and nimble, and sort of respond a bit better to people's demands, because there has been, I guess, a lack of use of sort of individual health consumers, everyday people using that platform, and even GPs and specialists as well. So that's a huge program of work that's been running for, again, like 5 years now. So it's good to see them get a top up there, and hopefully we can come out the other side and have a modern platform.
Okay. Anyone want to add anything at this point, or should we dive into some of the questions that is now starting to come through? Thank you very much, people.
Corrie, I'll jump in there. Just one little interesting tidbit that was a top-up of the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, which is essentially the privacy and information regulator. So Attorney General's department portfolio got quite a few funding boosts, and in that was $14 million for the OAIC, and it's been earmarked for enforcement action. So they're sort of in this transition themselves, where they're sort of restructuring how their divisions work and things like that. And a big driver of that is they want to be a more forceful or regulator who conducts more enforcement action. And I think there'll be a lot of people welcoming that too, because historically, when they've gone after companies like Meta, like Clearview, like Bunnings using facial recognition, those sort of things, it's taken many, many months, often years, to sort of resolve those cases. And so I think that's another welcome sign, and it's also a sign that this stuff is starting to be acted on by watchdogs. So it's one to keep an eye on.
Joe, am I right in saying that under the previous commissioner, there was a lot of reporting for a period where they were really struggling with funding? So this seems like it's quite a substantial turnaround.
Yeah, so they, a little bit like the CSIRO, they dealt with their own staffing cuts. So I believe it was last year that about 30% of their staff rolled off, and they're sort of at a level, I think, just under 200 staff at the moment, which is where they're expecting to sit. So they've sort of done that restructuring part, and now they're getting the money to sort of get on with the enforcement action. So a little bit more security, but again, if you look at the budget papers, some of that resourcing does tail off over the forward estimates. So it's something that may keep coming up for them.
Okay. So some questions here. Do the panel members have any confidence the SERD, SERD, is going to make any difference to investment, to levels of R&D activity, especially in business, with helping governments, especially this one, get the importance of R&D?
Yeah, I can take that one, Corey. So third, I'm taking to mean the strategic examination of R&D, which is the year-long review. The
Can
short
I just clarify, Joe? Is that the Robin Denham review?
I believe so, yeah, the one being led by Robin Denham, not due to report to the end of this year. So it's a little bit of wait and see, but they've already come out and sort of painted the picture of how big the challenge is. We're talking about lifting levels by tens of billions of dollars a year to get back to those global averages. So I think there's going to be some pretty frank findings in that, and then really it's going to boil down to the sort of the government of the day, whether that's still Ed Husic as the industry minister or a new government or a new minister. There's going to be, I think, recommendations for some pretty bold action, and it's really whether there's that political will and the appetite to make those decisions. Because, as I say, in tough economic times, it's going to be a hard fight to secure that sort of level of funding that both the government needs and then the policy tweaks to get business investing as well.
I would just add to that. I mean, like having someone like an eminent Australian like Robin Denham running that process is obviously an important thing. There will be recommendations that have gravitas, that carry weight within government. All of those things, but the cynic in me would say that it's been an aspirational goal to at least get to the OECD average for a decade. I mean, but the trend lines have been going in the wrong direction. So I think the conclusion that you can draw, even before Robin Denham holds a consultation, is that trend line demonstrates that this is, it's a long-term trend line. Doesn't matter which minister it is, doesn't matter which government it is, doesn't matter who's the prime minister, it doesn't matter, which side of politics is in government. Like there is that means it's not the whims of parties or ministers. There is a structural issue. So as Joe's saying, there's going to, like, whatever changes that they make are going to be difficult. Because as we know these days, the way our system operates, change is hard.
Maybe one day we won't be talking about economic complexity. Maybe we'll be talking about the next thing. An optimist, Chris, it's asking about whether the lack of investment in technology might be because there's some big announcements being held back for the election. Any chance of that? I can see people sort of tilting their head going, any feeling that there might have been an absence of anything in the budget because there's going to be some big election commitments, or is that too glass half full?
Well, look, I wouldn't put my life on it, but I'd seriously doubt it. In our portfolio, in the stuff that we're all interested in and the stuff that we cover, no, can't see it. There's too many, the big things that government has said it wants to focus on are in flight. So National AI Capability Plan, it was only announced in December. It doesn't report till the end of this year. There's the SIRD, that Strategic Examination of R&D, doesn't report till the end of the year. In the aftermath of that PsiQuantum investment, there was discussion about putting some real money into local industry, as in Australian quantum companies. And that's kind of in flight. There are consultations being made, but not a lot going on. So, I don't know, not a lot visibly going on. Perhaps there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes, but I don't know, if a government, has a budget and literally as the Treasurer stands up and said, these are our spending initiatives, I think you've got to take it as read that, the bulk of the program is as advertised.
I might jump in, James. I think it's quite telling in the papers. There is a lot of reliance on existing programs when there's talk of technology investment. So you've got things like, the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund, you've got the industry growth programs, you've got the CRC's all mentioned as drivers of this Future Made in Australia plan of the government's in the absence of additional funding. And the other one I would mention is the R&D tax incentive, which the government, for reasons unknown to us, is pulling out. How much of that is being used to fund AI? So I think in 2022 they say that it was something like 600 million. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but they've certainly made that clear in the papers. And I don't recall, $478 million. So I don't recall that being the case previously, where they've decided to pick a particular area and focus on that. So they're very much trying to tell the story that, these programs are in flight. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting already. That's the reason why we don't need to, or we haven't provided additional funding this year. So yeah, I thought that was interesting to see in the papers.
Just one question, and it's sort of one I have as well, about like Future Made in Australia, about whether, the categorisation of AI, actually has fallen into that Future Made in Australia initiative. So it's not missing altogether, it's just being under a different banner. Would that be fair?
I don't know. I actually, to be honest, have not seen that. I would say it's unlikely, given that the AI was mentioned, I think, in the speech once, in a section on productivity that the Treasurer has, that's basically a reheat of other speeches he's done this year, last year as well. So he's tried to tie AI into this productivity shift that we need to do, because obviously Australian productivity is very low at this stage. They're looking to AI as a way to lift that. But the fact that there's no funding for AI in Future Made, I seriously doubt that that's a serious contender at this stage. Maybe it will be in the future added in. There had been some reporting ahead of the budget about sort of a Future Made in Australia 2.0. We didn't see that yesterday, so we're not sure where that was coming from. But certainly not AI, information technology either. I don't see the connection in the papers in any. No, it's not strong enough to me to make the connection there.
Okay.
Can I just add something there? I think it's a really interesting question, and I don't know the answer to that. And in particular, I mean, with the Future Made stuff, I'm unsure whether data centers, if you include data centers as AI, as the infrastructure for AI, whether that is classified in Future Made in Australia. And I'm definitely going to be asking around about that immediately. I mean, that $27 billion that's potentially coming into more than double data center capacity, the data center compute power in the next 5 years. I mean, that's a giant amount of money. It is infrastructure, it is literal, it is the infrastructure of the AI age. It's hard to argue that that's not, that shouldn't be included in some way in programs under Future Made in Australia. Anyway, I'm not sure. We'll find out.
A question here about proposals to increase Australian productivity beyond reforming business registers. I guess we've kind of touched on that in different ways when you're talking about, AI and productivity, but the business registers, like, how important is that if we're talking about all the economic complexity and all the opportunities for productivity? It seems like if you characterised it as, circa early 2000s, keeping up with standards, it's not really a productivity output, I would have thought.
Well, I think it's definitely a productivity output, but it's one of those things we've been talking about for so long. Like, it would have been great if they finished it 10 years ago and we could all move on. Or, again, being somewhat cynical, it's not around the edges. Like, it's like that business register program, is important, but there's a lot of stuff that's important that governments are doing. That's one of them.
And just to add to that, James, on the productivity piece, one of the big selling points Jim Chalmers was talking about last night was non-compete clauses. So that's something that apparently affects millions of workers in Australia, and puts limits on what you can do at least immediately after your job. So that's a sort of low-hanging fruit, I think, for the government to be able to stamp that out. Doesn't cost them a lot to do it, and modelling from the Productivity Commission suggests that that can be a multi-billion-dollar driver of productivity just with sort of simple tweaks like that. So that was probably not a big splashy thing, but that's one that, you know, over a decade could see some real changes to productivity.
Okay. I don't know if anyone wants to riff anymore, because that is specifically a question from someone else who, where's the productivity progress going to come from? Feels very depressing. Tax advantages for investments. Is the R&D sufficient? Anything else? We've talked a little bit about business registers, AI, anything else that we might want to touch on there?
I might just add the I don't think we've touched on the R&D tax incentive. There was some estimates in the budget papers last night that show that that's going to fall by $650 million over the next 5 years, which is, you know, quite a turnaround from, I think, the close to $2.5 billion that they were suggesting last year over a similar period. So it suggests a massive slowdown in business investment, which I guess we're seeing across the board anyway. But that's going to continue for, you know, the medium term at least. So yeah, in terms of productivity, you know, whether you can connect the two, RDTI to productivity, maybe it's a bit of a tenuous link, but certainly, I mean, it's hard to see how that can really lift productivity if it's expected to fall by $650 million over 5 years. I think in the papers there is a slight lift of 50 million, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things is not a lot under that scheme over the next year. But yeah, over the medium term at least, it's much lower than we're talking now. So I suggest we're going to go backwards in some sense.
Okay.
So can I just, there is one other area, and it's not really a tangent, but this report that the government commissioned, Pathways to STEM, Pathways to Diversity in STEM, I think it was called. Sally Ann Williams chaired that, but you know, it was looking at how do we get more representation into the tech workforce or the STEM workforce, and that it was. It was sold as a review, as a productivity initiative. It is to get more women in the workforce, get more, more into the STEM workforce. So that was weirdly, it was given to the minister a year ago, I believe. But then announced, Justin was at a conference in South Australia, South Start, and the minister gave a speech and announced that the government had accepted all 11 or 12 recommendations. But in the budget today, no new money that we could tell. It was a little bit hard to tell. There wasn't, like, they've accepted the recommendations in a speech, but then there was no formal response from government. Normally a government would respond by saying, we agree with this recommendation, here's what we're going to do. Or we agree with this one, here's what we're going to do. So that didn't happen. And a budget has come and gone, and there doesn't appear to be new programs, new initiatives around that. Now, that's not even a tangential productivity thing. In our industry, it's actually an important one. But I don't know, it's kind of slid off.
The announceable with no announceable, if that makes sense. I don't know if this is something that you can answer, but and I might make it that someone's asked about when Australian technology industry will get categorisation under the ABS standards. I don't think there will be anything in the budget that would talk to that necessarily. That looks like more of a structural thing, but I do think I've heard people say how important that is, so we can actually get a consistent picture of what we're talking about. Someone else just commenting, Joe, I think you mentioned about Jim Chalmers talking about non-compete clauses and asking whether that's going to impact IP. I don't know the answer. Do you?
Look, I don't know. Potentially, something we can look into, but yeah, that's a potential issue, and itself, IP and holding on too tightly can also be a drag on productivity. So yeah, how they struck that balance will be very interesting.
Okay. I know this is something that the reporting team has been focused on is the AI mandatory guardrails framework has been in the final stages for some time now, with no mention or specific funding in the budget. Are we expecting a change in approach? I think we've kind of covered it by the vibe of the thing, but any specific insights there and any of the conversations you've been having, as well as what was in the budget last night?
Look, it's one of these imponderables. I mean, so this government, as I mentioned before, has had a focus on the regulatory side of AI, and it's got on and done that. I just, you have to wonder out loud the kind of Trump effect on this stuff. Whether, if government was about to introduce these mandatory guardrails, and then suddenly Donald Trump is talking about tariffs and penalising countries that get in the way of American trade, which includes obviously the big tech companies, then perhaps I've read a story the other day saying that they've hit pause. I mean, for no other reason than nothing's been announced when the minister had said they were finalising in January and in readiness to do this. So again, a budget has come and gone. And that wasn't announced. I mean, I'm thinking Trump effect to hit pause. It doesn't mean they're not going to get, it doesn't mean they're not going to happen, but it does seem like there's a bit of a wait and see.
Also,
just going to chip in there. Sorry, Justin. I was in Washington, D.C. this week and had the opportunity to speak to a number of Australian and American business leaders in government, and they very specifically called out some of that digital platform stuff as part of the trade stuff and take it very seriously. Any indications from the Australian government of curbing, doing business in Australia, but you're having it framed from within the states. It is something that they were obviously looking at, and I think it sounds like the Australian government's conscious of that. Sorry, Justin, I cut you off.
No, it's all good. I was just going to say on the AI, the guardrails. I mean, it's unlikely that we see them now before the election because, they're saying it's going to be called as maybe as soon as Friday, the election. So yeah, we're unlikely to see those guardrails in the next 2 days, and it could well be the Trump effect, because the Trump effect, like you said, has had an impact on platforms more generally. We've got some of the big tech companies calling out the social media ban that's going to come in later this year. Up in arms about that. The sort of mandatory bargaining incentives around media payments from Google, also another hot topic. So yeah, there's very much this anti-regulation approach at the moment from US tech giants, and it's not just Australia, it's the EU, it's Canada, as we've seen in other ways as well. So it's across the board, but Australia being a sort of a first mover in this space with a lot of tech policy, it no doubt will be a focus.
Yeah, I heard the phrase today, a Trump bump, but maybe Australia could look at it in terms of a Trump slump in the areas of So incentives for manufacturing investment, this sounds like a recession. Like for manufacturing, I haven't heard much about that in this webinar, much in the budget.
There was a little bit of extra for aluminium and green metals a little bit as well. So that's a sort of extension of the future made in Australia, but it is out in the future. It's the projects you need to start planning now to deliver years down the track, and then you only get those incentives when you're actually producing the commodity. So again, I think that they extended out, they broadened out future made to metals and green aluminium, but it's a long way coming. So and manufacturers, and you can ask the opposition this, they're doing it really tough. There's some very high insolvency rates. The value add levels, I think, are going down as well. So there's this sort of grand plan for the next decade, but look, I think there's a lot of manufacturers that would have loved some support at the moment as well.
A question here about some of the digital budget figures were not for publication. Was there any discussion around that? I understand that that's not uncommon to see that in budget papers, but or maybe if you can even explain what that means and why it's important and what it might indicate.
Yeah, the NFP figures that we saw, I think, related to some of the DTA work and PMC work around platforms. It sounds like it might be related to the procurement review that's going on around sort of these sort of mega deals that the government has signed with the likes of SAP, Microsoft, AWS, that kind of thing. So it could be related to that and the negotiations around some of those deals, future deals. But yeah, look, it's not uncommon to see NFP for commercial related, where there's a tender on the go or they're in final stages of negotiations. So, yeah, I would say that it was even less this year than in previous years, but that's maybe also a product of the fact there was less initiatives overall. But yeah, if I think about NFP, it was mostly that piece around government procurement, tech procurement in PMC. Maybe there was another one that someone else would have seen, but that's the one that stands out for me.
Yeah, there was another one in the science funding with the Centre for Disease Preparedness, which is it's been around for a few decades, and it's sort of how we deal with livestock and diseases and things like that. And that's getting a refit, probably sorely needed, I would think. But that they don't publish those figures about how much funding they get due to commercial sensitivities and how they negotiate those deals with suppliers. So there are quite legitimate reasons for not publishing some of those figures.
I'm going to paraphrase some of the questions here because I think we've covered some of it. One person's asking about the difficulty with the R&D, RDTI falling. Has the government given up? Is that? I mean, I don't think you guys can look into a crystal ball, but so I don't even know if I want to take that as a statement, but because it's one you probably can't answer, but it is something that someone's asked.
But there is, sorry, Justin, we were talking about this yesterday. There is a specific reason why that RDTI, why those payments are falling next year? Do you step through that?
I can't remember the conversation. There was a lot of conversations yesterday. But yeah, from memory, mostly, I don't think there was an actual reason from memory at all. Just the fact that there was going to be lower claims. Yeah. Anyway,
sorry to throw you in there like that.
Another question, and I don't know if we haven't covered it already. I'm going to say the answer is probably no. But given the changes to the government administration in the US, Australia is suddenly looking very clearly at what sovereignty looks like. Any particular budget allocation to Australian sovereign capabilities? And I guess if we don't,
well, there was one. There was one strange one. There was $20 million allocated to publicising the Buy Australia plan, which that's a $20 million advertising campaign for Buy Australia. I'm presuming. But look, in the time that we spent going through these pages, I mean, at the end of the day, everything is kind of related to this in some way, but specific things around building sovereign capability. I mean, yes, there are National Reconstruction Fund, IGP, all that kind of stuff. Like everything relates to it. Whether there were any specific things kind of Trump inspired or, based on what we've seen in more recent times, not really. It is interesting that, that the industry and finance departments came up with with a definition of an Australian company. It sounds bizarre that they had to do this, but they have come up for the purposes of procurement with a definition of what is an Australian company. All right. And it's kind of based around, where you pay your tax, where you do your R&D, how many people you employ. So all of this in the context of procurement. And then they've also provided guidance around how government should approach procurement decisions based on that definition. Like if you're buying from this Australian company, like how would you rate that Australian company against a foreign competitor? And they've come up with this, kind of a statement of retained economic benefit where, again, where do you pay your tax? Where are you doing the software development? Are you, where do you train your people to do the software development? Those kinds of things where instead of it simply being a price that government will pay for a product or service, it's a price, but there are, spillover benefits to the Australian economy because all the work's being done here. So that's a big piece of work. Like, that is a big piece of work. It's not just IT, that's across everything. And that's, that in the context of building sovereign capability and even contributing to economic complexity. Yeah, that was a big piece of work. And really, it's one that I don't understand why they haven't talked about it as much as they should. It's something that they could really should kind of hang their hat on. Maybe that's the Trump effect. You're not allowed to talk about policies that look like they might, help your local industry or help build sovereign capability.
I guess if you can actually define it, then you can actually measure it and grow it. And I think that's been a frustration that it hasn't been done sooner, but by all accounts, it's been pretty tricky to do. So I think, genuinely, and they could make a movie about it. They could make a comedy about this. It is hilarious. Apparently, there's been knife between the teeth, hand-to-hand combat, trench warfare over this definition of what an Australian company is between a multinational who says, I have an Australian operation. I have an ABN. What more do you want? We're Australian. Everyone in the company is Australian. We're all Australians. We have an ABN. So they're saying that. What do you want us to do?
Well,
and the obvious answer would be pay tax.
Or be more Australian. Yeah, pay tax. I mean, without being flippant, there is a definition around, where your headquarters are, where the decision making is, where you effectively you're domiciled for tax purposes, that kind of thing.
I'm going to blend together another crystal ball question, a couple of questions. What are we expecting, if anything, from one, the budget reply speech from Angus Taylor, and secondly, the election campaign? Any thoughts on where the kind of whether the coalition might sort of come out with things that are, unexpectedly surprising and positive?
Peter Dutton is going to deliver that speech. Budget reply. Yeah, okay. It's the opposition leader. But I think it's a little bit unknowable, right? Because they've been so small target up to this point. They've been so, I don't say bereft of policy, but literally they haven't really put a lot out there. So it's kind of hard to get a sense of it. We've got a new minister, Senator Claire Chandler, Shadow Minister, in our area. So we don't really know her. Like, I've spoken to her, obviously, but a bit hard to get a sense. She hasn't really got her feet under the table. So it's difficult to read, I guess, is what I would say to that.
And just to add on the industry side, there's a little bit in what they promised not to do, and that is one of them is unwind future made. So a lot of those that planning and some of those projects in green hydrogen and those sort of areas would become a lot more uncertain without those production credits. So that is something they'd wind back. Their manufacturing policy is very much about lower energy prices and probably some industrial relations and things like that. So it's a little bit more conventional, I guess, But yeah, to James, your point that there is not a lot of detail out there. So yeah, it's one to keep watching too.
Got a question here about digital and data transformation and aged care. Anything in the budget about supporting providers, digital transformation, education and training to boost digital capability of healthcare workforce? We've all seen the looming kind of growth of the baby boomers sort of reaching elderly years. Anything in here from a digital and data perspective that might support that?
Definitely on aged care, there's a little bit of a top up in funding for some of those systems. So on July 1, there's sort of a big switch over to the new Aged Care Act, and with that has come a whole lot of new IT, both on the government side and some new expectations of providers. So they've topped up a little bit of that funding, and part of that is a switch that was very quietly announced earlier this year to a sort of staged rollout of those digital systems. So there's I don't have it at hand, but it's sort of in the range of $10 or $20 million, that sort of thing, to get some of those systems humming as it sort of staged rollout. So that, I think that's good. That is that's a change, a reform that is just mammoth. So it's probably going to have some teething issues, and there's a lot being asked on both sides by providers and government systems. So I think that was welcome to see, but yeah, we won't know how effective that is until later this year, probably.
Can I just jump in? Roy Green's come to the rescue with an answer on the change forecaster RDTI, and this just reminds me, this is a conversation we had yesterday, Justin, and it's in your story. One of the reasons could include, Roy says, exclusion of gambling and tobacco, and we know that there were big payments to gambling and tobacco companies on the back of their own applications over RDTI. Thanks, Roy.
Something I think Roy's also been talking about is any discussion of the EU Horizons Fund. No.
No is the short answer. Not that I could see in the budget papers. That push has gotten a bit louder with the Trump sort of movements to cast their eye over US-funded research that's being done with Australian partners. So that has sort of led to this call to diversify our research partner base, and the sort of the key or quickest, biggest way to do that is joining Horizon, but no movement on that front.
No movement. Okay. This is a rhetorical question. Can the government do without contractors and consultants and stray out of their swim lanes of delving course services to citizens? The whole notion of having an Australian government consulting capability is the nonsensical, especially when they're going to follow the UK model. We've ditched that concept, so now I gather we're going to follow the New Zealand model. I would take the question, we talk about, obviously, the coalition are talking about kind of contracting the size of the public service, other questions about what capability exists within the public service, and that kind of great tension point between consultants and public service capability. I don't know if there's anything in the budget or there's any comments to that.
I'll have a crack, but yes, you're right. The coalition is saying that between 37 and 41,000 APS staff are on the chopping block, which is sizable, and the vast majority of that will fall outside of Canberra. So it's not just, there's often this idea that it'll just affect Canberra and the economy here, but it is very much across the board. In terms of contractors, there are some interesting figures in the budget papers about the conversion rates from contractors to public servants. I mean, social services has converted something like 8,000 full-time staff over the course of this government. So there's been a real push there. I imagine a lot of that's in sort of call centre staff that was previously outsourced. So yeah, 8,000 there, and I think another 1,500 in defence. Defence has got a long way to go, and it's also one of the main, I think a lot of the savings are to be found in defence for contractors. So I think they've got quite a bit to go. But yeah, another 1,500 there. So yeah, it's happening. Australian government consulting, there's small funding. I think it's part of the NFT funding in the budget paper, so it hasn't been broken out this year. So I imagine it's fairly small fry. There was funding last year. I believe there was funding the year before that. So they have initial funding, but it's slow moving, and I suspect it'll perhaps step up if the government returns for another term.
Okay. That's the majority of the questions. There's some others that are really asking you to look into crystal balls. Like, if the budget's like this become the norm, where do you see the Australian economy in 10 years? So I'm not sure if anyone wants to exactly. So what I might do is just ask you, just for kind of final thoughts. We've covered a lot of territory, and but if there's anything that we've missed or that you'd like to bring up. Anyone?
I will very quickly say that, obviously election coming up, it's going to be a little bit strange, but this week, we're focused on budget policy issues. We've got Jim Chalmers in the Great Hall today at National Press Club address. So he'll get grilled a little bit more. We'll find out a little bit more about what the priorities are. I will certainly be trying to ask him about some of the AI data center issues. So it's not really a final thought, but I will just go back to my original point. How do we deliver a budget without mentioning these, fundamental, foundational technology? For people in our sector, we tend to look on that as being slightly inexplicable. So I want to ask him.
I'll maybe jump in. It's not unusual to see a smaller budget leading into an election. They're very much, it's small focus, cost of living, putting money back in people's pockets. There's tax cuts in there. So it's very much about winning votes, not so much about the economic project that, the government has been talking about, Future Made in Australia. That's a big part of their re-election campaign, but there's not that much in the papers around that and how they're going to push ahead and transform the economy. Just a small bit on government tech. I feel like there's a big legacy tech debt issue coming up. We've pushed out a lot of major investments. There's been a lot of reviews over the last 3 years about projects that haven't really gone the way that they had thought. So there's now a backup in government tech projects. So and that's growing year on year. You see it in government reports, the number of systems that are reaching end of life. So I suspect that they'll need more funding for that moving forward. So that'll be an interesting one to watch.
Justin, I'm just going to take the last question and wrap it into your that response you just made, because I think they're related. Anything in the budget to look at transformation of the procurement process across government, because there is misspending of millions of dollars. And if we're talking about, crashing into a bunch of legacy tech and, what that procurement process looks like in the future, anything. I mean, I guess the definition of Australian company is part of that procurement piece, but anything else in there that might be of interest?
Yeah, I think we've covered it off. I mean, the definition of an Australian company, there's a bit of a tension there with defence, which have a different sort of definition of sovereign. They if you're a multinational prime and you have a base here in Australia, you're considered sovereign for the purposes of defence. So there's a little tension there around procurement. Katie Gallagher's been really pushing procurement reform over the last 3 years. So I think it has improved. There's, changes to Austender and things like that around reporting of amendments and better reporting of any increases that happen. I mentioned it a little earlier. There's the review of major government deals with big tech giants. There's been criticism from local players that there aren't similar deals with them. It's only multinationals that have those deals. So I think the government will be looking to perhaps cut away some of the ones that they don't use as much and maybe focus on, the big players. I won't mention who they are, but, we could well see domestic players signing deals as well, especially as we go through things like the ERP uplift that's meant to happen now that GovERP's rolled off. So that's, over the next 5 years or so, that's going to be a big program of work where, dozens of agencies will need to replace the ERP system. So there'll be lots of work there for local and international players.
Sorry, Joe, final thoughts from you?
Oh, look, I tried to look at this budget in the context of the three before it, and that was sort of Jim Chalmers' battle of the inflation dragon and still making the investments that sort of position Australia to take advantage of all that sort of, I think he calls it, churn and change in the global world, and that's probably only gotten more uncertain in the last year. He's now facing tariffs and sort of big tech pushing to impact domestic rules and things like that. So in fairness to them, I think it's been a difficult balance to strike, and in some ways this one was a little bit underwhelming. But look, if you zoom out a bit and maybe even consider they may be back for a second term, I think it does keep a pretty steady platform for what is some really difficult change. So yeah, in that sense, it was a little bit encouraging, and it's still pretty exciting times.
The idea of sitting in a room with a big stack of papers is absolutely daunting to me, and the fact that you go in there and tear it apart and digest it for all of us, very grateful. It's a mammoth effort, and thank you for answering all the questions and spending the time. And yes, great stuff. Really appreciate the time, and thank you for another budget lockup. Right, everyone, thank you for joining. I think there'll be a follow-up email from our team, and if there's any further questions, a place that you can pose them to our editorial team. But thank you so much for joining us for Budget 2025.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.